I think we're good to go.
Excellent. Well, welcome everyone to our junior college prep night. We are very, very excited to have tonight the two big prongs that you need when you're looking at college. One is college test prep, and the other is kind of the application process. So AJ Tutoring, Peter Littlefield is with us tonight. He is the Regional Director of Test Prep and Academic Tutoring, and with him is also Rachel. They are wonderful. I don't know if anyone's been to AJ Tutoring, but they are just a really great resource. And when you're doing the ACT or SAT, test prep is really great. I have a senior and I can tell you that it's a really good thing to do. And then the other prong is the application process, which is a very intensive process, figuring out what schools to apply to, majors, things like that. What's your personal statement? What activities? How do you list them? It's very intensive. And for that, we have Roxana Dahmer. She's with College Calm, which she started back in 2009. And she has a very comprehensive program for that as well. And with her today is her colleague, Jenny. So I will turn it over to you.
Good. Lauren, thanks so much. Rachel, if you want to share slides from your end, that'd be awesome. Yeah, so my name is Peter. As Lauren mentioned, I'm a regional director at AJ Tutoring. So I help support our tutoring services in the local area. Two really important people here. Rachel Dwinnell is our Woodside office director. Our Woodside office is basically on the Woodside High School campus. That's right at the corner of Alameda de los Pulgas and Woodside or 84. So we're super local. And then Patrick Keenan is here as well. He's our Menlo Park office director. We're over here near the Refuge, right by a coffee bar. These are probably the two most well-known places on the block. AJ Tutoring, as Lauren was saying, we're pretty well known for test prep in the area. We're really excited to be able to offer those services, help students understand what they need to do in terms of getting prepped for the SAT or ACT, and really helping like a full service understanding of what that prep is going to look like. So when to start, what to work on, what to expect. We also do a lot of academic tutoring. So, if your student is working on a class in high school, we can help out. We also do a little bit with K-8 students, actually quite a bit over the past few years. College students will even do some grad test prep. So we try to be an all-in-one, one-stop shop for any tutoring needs you might have. But tonight we're really going to focus, of course, on those high school juniors in terms of test prep and academic. Cool. Rachel, go for it. Rachel, it looks like you're muted still. Are you having trouble unmuting? It looks like. Gotcha. It should be like if you hover over the bottom, you can probably get to a menu to unmute.
There we go. I think I had to stop screen sharing to unmute. All right, so let's get back to the presentation. All right.
Muted you again.
So it seems like it will not let me both present and talk at the same time. Would either Peter or Patrick, would you be willing to screen share while I'm talking? Thank you. All right, so let's go down maybe another like 2 slides. Slide number 5, or actually let's just move on to, slide number 6. There we go. All right, so I'm going to be telling everybody a little bit about the SAT and ACT tonight. I think the first thing that I really want to drive home tonight is that The SAT and ACT are not aptitude tests. They test a couple of core skills that your students will have seen at some point in their high school careers. So things like reading comprehension, grammar and punctuation, some algebra, some geometry, and that's really it. So it doesn't test their ability to succeed in college, it just tests some skills that they've worked on in high school. I've already touched a little bit on the content that it tests. So the SAT has 4 sections. There's a reading section, a writing and language section, and then 2 math sections. First math section is no calculator. The second one is calculator permitted. And pretty much the entire test is multiple choice with the exception of a couple of free response questions in the 2 math sections. As far as the scoring, the overall test is out of 1,600 points. That's divided into 400 points for reading, 400 points for writing and language, and then 800 points for math. And then you take the sum of those section scores to get the student's composite score. So I have an example here for you. A student could get 270 points in the reading section, 250 in writing and language, and then a 610 in math for an overall score of 1,130 points. We get this question a lot of what is a good score, and it's not really, there's no easy answer. It depends a lot on the student and it depends a lot on the schools that they are applying to. So it's really more looking at where the student is going and what that school is looking for to make sure that your student is on track for their applications. To give you just a little bit of a reference point though, it is very different from the grades that we see in high schools. It's not like we're looking for 90% on this test. The national average last year, according to the College Board that runs the SAT, was a 1050 out of 1,600 points. From there, let's talk a little bit about super scoring. I don't know if you've heard this term before. It's not done at every single school, so you need to check in to see if the schools that your student are applying to or actually do super scoring. The idea is that if the student takes the test multiple times, the school can look at their best individual section scores across the tests to get one very, very good score. Like I said, it's not a common practice at schools, so you'd have to check to make sure before you try to rely on super scoring. All right, on to the ACT. The ACT is similar to the SAT with some notable differences. Same thing, it's not an aptitude test. It tests very similar skills to the SAT. So there's a reading section, writing and language, a math section. The big difference there is that there's also a science section. It's not what your student remembers from their biology class or chemistry class or physics. It's more about looking at data and being able to draw conclusions. Beyond that, it also has the option of an essay, but most students, I think, prefer not to take the essay section if they can avoid it. And that, again, is whether or not they should take that essay. Again, depends on the student, depends on the schools that they're applying to. The scoring is also a little bit different for the ACT. Instead of taking the sum of the 4 section scores, they take the average. So if a student gets a 23 on English, 29 on math, 18 on science, and 21 on reading, the average of those scores would come to a 22.75, which then is rounded to a whole number, 23, when it's reported to schools. Same thing as what I said for the SAT. This is not like we're looking for a 90% on these tests. The national average for the ACT last year was 20.6 out of a possible 36 points. So students, this idea of what's a good score is going to depend on what the student and where they're applying to go to school. And similar to what I said before about super scoring, it really is just a matter of taking the strongest section scores from individual tests and taking the average of those scores when applying to schools. SAT versus ACT. We get this question all the time. Should my student take the SAT or the ACT? And most of the time we find that students perform equally well on both tests. 80% of students score similarly on the SAT and ACT. For the other 20%, you unfortunately won't really know until you try it. We at AJ, we do have a hybrid diagnostic that takes some content from the SAT and ACT to give you an idea of how you would score on each of the 2 tests. So you don't have to sit for 2 full-length tests, just one. And as far as pros and cons of the 2 tests, it is mainly that if we're speaking in broad strokes, The SAT it has much more intense questions. They're much more in depth, but the pacing is a little bit more relaxed. The SAT has slightly more surface level questions, but the pacing is much more rapid. I think I'm ready for the next one. All right, upcoming SAT and ACT dates. So you can see here, the next test is coming up for the ACT in February. From there, we kind of alternate back and forth between SAT and ACT each month until June. You have the option for both tests. In the past year, we saw a lot of cancellations for SAT and ACT as a result of COVID. This has not been the case really as much this year. I'd still recommend signing up for 2 dates right away in case your first test date is canceled, so that your student is not rushing to sign up for the next test date alongside everybody else. We haven't seen many cancellations. It's just a good safe practice. Some other important things there to keep in mind: if your student has a 504 or IEP, you should really plan on applying for accommodations well in advance. I'd say like 3 months in advance, just to make sure that there's plenty of time to process that request. Another thing to consider is that if you're planning on doing prep for the test, it's good to start 13 weeks in advance if possible, because there is a lot of content and it gives time for students to take some practice tests and really practice the things that they've identified they need to work on. Onto the different approaches that you see here. We have 3 different pathways here, depending upon the student. We have the minimalist approach, which is just taking the SAT in March, May, or June, which leaves time for a retake in October. The more common approach would be taking an SAT in March or May, then switching over to the ACT in April or June. You can make that transition pretty quickly because there is a lot of overlap in content. And keep in mind that there are AP exams in May, so it could be stressful to take the SAT in May, but some students may want to do it anyway. From there, students have the chance to do a retake in August or October for the SAT, or the ACT in September. For the more intense approach, this would be more for students who are applying to really selective schools who need to have that like really top-notch score, or for possibly students who are hoping to be athletes in college or get scholarships for athletics. We would recommend taking an SAT first attempt in December or March of their junior year, then the ACT in April with AP exams in May, so that they can do a retake for the SAT or ACT in June, and then possibly an additional retake later in the fall of their senior year. For UCs, so some of you may have heard the terms test blind and test optional. I'm going to talk about those first before we talk about the strategy for UCs. The term test blind means that schools will not look at SAT or ACT scores for any part of their admission process or any part of scholarships. So not really useful if your student is looking at those particular schools. There's also the term test optional, which means that your student is not required to submit scores, but if they do, the school will use that as a part of their consideration for their application. The UC has announced that they are going test blind. So if your student is applying to the UCs, they won't need the SAT or ACT for the UCs, but there's a chance that they're going to want to apply to other schools as well. Even if they're dead set on going to a UC right now, it's a good idea for them to still take an SAT or ACT in case they change their mind later on. I think the idea is that we don't want to close doors before they've made their decision. As far as just the benefit of taking the SAT, it's also worthwhile because these, like I mentioned, are testing the core skills that they should be learning throughout high school. So we've seen that a lot of students prepare for the SAT or ACT, and it ends up strengthening their performance in their math classes or their reading classes. So it's still worthwhile, even if your student ends up not meeting those scores. It is a good way just to strengthen the skills that they test. So I'll hand it over now to Patrick, who's going to talk a little bit more about academics.
Hi, can you hear me, guys? Okay. Oh, cool. They should figure out how to do two things at once. Yeah, so as Rachel mentioned, a lot of schools these days, as a result of COVID, have gone either test blind or test optional. That means that scores can have a relatively smaller impact on your admissions package, especially in those test blind cases like the UCs. This does mean that other portions of your application take up a relatively larger part of your application. Foremost amongst those is academics, grades, if you will. So, especially as a junior, junior academics factor heavily into acceptances at test blind and test optional schools. So, probably have got enough stress in your life, you've heard this enough times, but, putting in some extra effort to do well in your academic coursework is worthwhile. Some of the things we've been noticing more recently over the course of, getting back into after disruptions from last school year, especially with my students, noticed like a really wide variety of experiences. Some students have done extremely well with distance learning and have gone seamlessly back into courses. Their teachers did a great job with distance learning, which is wonderful. Some teachers and some students struggled, unfortunately, to either deliver content that was just hard to deliver. Some tests are really hard to deliver. Some content's just hard to test virtually. I've heard stories of students just Googling answers or, relying on photomath or things like that. And all of that has led to some deficiencies and some really core competencies. Things that are tested on the SAT and ACT, things that come up again in math, subjects that are continuous, subjects like math, subjects like English, things like reading comprehension, things like fundamental math skills and algebra skills. They're, not just academically heavy skills for the next couple of years, they're fundamental life skills as well. So I think there's been a lot of problems that have been brought to the surface over the last couple of years. So taking proactive steps earlier on to help, I think, is something worth considering. Obviously there's a lot of great resources out there at the school as well as next to the school. So, we're happy to talk and happy to be a part of that in any way we can. Another thing that's related to academics is AP tests. So Woodside High School offers a lot of AP tests, coursework and tests. We recommend that you don't really think about taking the test unless you're taking the course. There could be some exceptions to that, but very, very basically not worth talking about. The AP tests, I think, are really interesting in that they're kind of back to their old self already. There was some disruption with the AP tests initially. They trimmed down the content and changed the format of the tests. But last year and apparently this year, they're going right back to, can I apply full screen to the slides, I think? Okay. This is the last slide, so I'm actually just going to run through. I'm sorry if it's having trouble. Anyways, so yeah, AP courses are back on track. They're covering the same amount of content. So if any of the deficiencies I was talking about earlier are popping up, they could represent a problem in terms of academics in the course and not getting credit by taking an AP test. AP test scores also factor in as part of your testing test scores that you could choose to include on your application package. Even if SATs and ACTs are not accepted, AP scores can be submitted as well. So, one of the things I like to check into is to check in on my students and make sure that I feel like they're going to be prepared for their APs. Typically, a good heuristic for me is if a teacher in early April has finished all their content and is starting to shift over towards AP review, because early May is when AP tests are going to happen. So if sometime early in April, first or second week of April, we're finishing up all of our content and focusing on the test instead, then I feel like we're going to be in a good place to really succeed on those tests. Another thing I would like to mention that we do here is we also offer 4-credit courses. This is another option if a student is not thriving in their academic course at their school. we can switch to a one-on-one for credit course, which is mastery-based and paced according to students' individual needs. Those are also possible over summer. They're accredited. There are AP electives that can be taken in that way. Just another of the number of phenomenal services that are on offer next door. Another update on AP exams. Like last year, pencil and paper exams are going to be offered in the first 2 administrations, so the first 2 weeks of May and second 2 weeks of May. So we're going back to paper and pencil tests, which I think is a good thing. And I mentioned sort of gauging current progress. I would look to be on track to finish up in early April. Okay. Stop my share here and hand it over to Jenny. Are you going next, or is it Roxana?
I will take over. Thank you so much. That was a lot of really great information. So I'm Roxana. I am sort of founder and owner of College Calm. I'm so happy to be with you guys tonight. We've done this the last few years, just like AJ, and which we've been doing it for a long time. And I try to bring something new to every time that we present, in case you have, people like Lauren who have back-to-back kids, right? And so today we're going to go through some of the things that we learned from sort of the 2021 cycle, and also as we're learning for this class of 2022 as the things are rolling in. So I'm going to go through some of the observations, and I'm going to do that pretty quickly, because when we talked about what families could really use in this session, there was sort of like the practical, what do you need to do now? Right? And what do you need to do later? And so I've really, Jenny and I work together, and I just want to do a shout out to Jenny, who does all the behind the scenes stuff for this presentation and for pretty much everything at College Calm. She is not only my right hand, she's also my left hand. So thank you so much, Jenny. We're going to go through how we look at the process and what students should be doing now. We are also going to deliver to you in your email with this recording. We are going to give you a spring junior checklist. We are going to give you the Gantt chart that we do to like separate, the next year and a half in terms of what students should be doing. We're going to give you resources to start building a college list. There's a tons of things, and we're just going to send you links to documents and websites and stuff. So don't be overly concerned that you have to take a ton of notes. If that's your learning style, go for it. But know that we're going to follow up with a lot of resources. In addition to that, as you're asking questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. Jenny's going to monitor both the chat and the Q&A. But if there's anything that we can't get to tonight, we will follow up and answer them in a Google Sheet. So AJ will have a Google Sheet with all the testing questions. And then we'll have a list with all of the other questions, and we will also put the answers that we've already put in the chat. So we'll follow up with all of that. So here we go. So these are the basics, and I'm just going to go pretty quick, because I think that it's more, we want to move a little bit more to the practical. But in terms of the big picture of what we're seeing, applications are still going up. And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to have a slide for each one of these. Merit aid is actually still really good, if not better. Testing is complicated. Students are fatigued, behind, and overwhelmed. Side note, I am a parent of a student in the class of 2023. And this, the feeling in talking with kids and, having one of those students at home, I think this is pretty accurate in terms of how they felt about first semester. And then the idea that social justice, inclusion, and service are really important concepts in the college process. So here we go. I pulled this from the UC conference, which we attend every fall. And I just wanted families to see it, to kind of get an idea of like what do we mean by like applications are increasing, right? I think when you took away the test scores, there's a lot of people that are applying to schools that maybe would not have had testing been a big part of that process. So what we see is the fall 2021, the number of apps that came in for UCLA was almost 140,000. Okay, and I looked up in terms of in 2020, it was 108,000, close to 109,000, which actually was a decrease a little bit. So what you're seeing is a lot more people are applying. So what does that mean? There's a lot more competition. And I think in general, kids were applying to a lot more schools because of that. The other thing that I think is important to know just in looking at this, right, in terms of admits, there was 15,000 admits, 11% admit rate for a class that was 6,714 students. On the right-hand side, I think is an important thing to look at, because when you're looking at statistics, we don't always know what is being posted and where it comes from. And I think it's really interesting to note that the UCs, right, some of them use a capped GPA, which just caps the number of AP and honors extra points you can get. It's not a big deal. It simply means it applies to everybody, right? So it doesn't hurt anyone. However, a lot of times when you see the GPA or like the mid 50% GPA posted for UCLA, you see a capped GPA, okay? But what you see in the next part is weighted GPA, fully weighted GPA. So if you want to know the middle 50th percentile of students who are accepted to UCLA, 4.36 to a 4.72, which feels very different, right? And so it's a really important thing to note. And then obviously those students are doing a lot of rigor. The other thing is on the bottom, you see like waitlist offers. That's definitely a trend going forward. Schools are using waitlists. And as much as we think that they're going to keep going to them and finding more students, in the past 2 years, the waitlists have not been used very much. However, UCLA had 15,000 kids on the waitlist, right? Just something to note. And then they had almost 10,000 opt in to be on the wait list. What we don't have is the number that they admitted. It was very low. And the other part was appeals, right? So sometimes students will appeal because they think that the decision wasn't fair, or, you know, and you see like there were 1,200 appeals and 2 students were admitted off of appeal. And this came straight from UCLA. That's where this slide came from. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I think the other thing in terms of, I'm just using the UC as an example, the other trends that we're seeing, and this is what the UC was really highlighting in terms of 2021 was great for the UC admissions. And the reason that it was great in their perspective is that they didn't have to use test scores. They admitted more California freshmen than they have in any other year, 84,000. And the underrepresented students are the highest proportion of California freshman admits ever. Okay, and those are things that they're super proud of. And so I just wanted to kind of bring that in terms of the UC system. The other thing about numbers and increasing applications and all of that is to recognize that early decision for private schools, right, which is binding, you only do it to one school. So early decision is a big part of private school admissions, and actually some public schools have it as well. And what that means is that early decision, which is binding, right, and you can only do it to one school, there's a lot of private schools that are filling 50% of their slots early decision. And that's really important to note because ED is starting to rule parts of admission. And there's a lot of things about ED, if a student knows that it's their first choice, that is fantastic, right? It works really well. The other thing is it's a little bit harder to figure out if there's going to be scholarships, if there's going to be need-based aid, if there's going to be merit aid. And it's a lot of pressure to put on a kid, right? But smaller private schools, it's becoming the only way to get in. And the other thing is that for early action, right, which just means that you apply early and then the school tells you early, and then you still get to make your decision in April. What we're seeing with early action is it used to be you turned it in November 1st and you'd know by Christmas. And it was great because it would take a lot of pressure off of kids because they'd get into schools that they, were excited about and they could kind of relax a little bit, right? What we're seeing is that EA notification dates are moving later and later and later. And let me tell you, this I think is a terrible thing. because I think that making the kids have to turn something in really early and then making them wait forever for a decision is really hard. And so that's just something else to note. Like kids who applied to University of North Carolina, they had a deadline of October 15th. Those kids have still not heard, right, for early action. If you applied to Michigan November 1st, you are still waiting to hear. However, there are some bright spots in terms of schools that I just want to point out. University of Oregon, if you turn in your application before November 1st, so if you turn it in sometime in October, the turnaround for our kids this year was a week. And so that is something really important to note. And schools that have rolling admissions, that's what it means. The earlier you turn it in, the earlier you get it back. And let me tell you, in terms of reducing the stress of the college process, that to me is a really big piece of it. So when you're starting to look at schools and how kids are going to apply and things like that, just rolling admissions, early action can be a way to kind of just decrease the stress for kids and for them to be like, woohoo, I got in. University of Arizona gets back to kids pretty fast. In fact, now that I'm saying it out loud, I feel like we should make a blog post that's basically like all universities that are going to let you know sooner rather than later, because I think that's a really important piece. All right, so there's still a ton of merit aid to be had. So clients at College Com are typically not eligible for need-based aid, all right? And it's actually really hard in California with housing prices and things like that. If you own your house, or have some investments, or you've put away some money in your kids' 529s, like that need-based aid is really hard to come by. But we just wanted to put a selection here. These are kids from this year. So of our, clients, we had, by the time that we did this presentation, 115 plus early action or early decision acceptances, and the kids earned over $2 million in merit-based aid. And what we wanted to highlight on the left is the schools that are giving out a ton of money, because I think that's important when people are looking at this process. It's not just about, do you go to the school that the most competitive school you get into? Like there's an academic fit, there's a social fit, and there's a financial fit. So I just want to give a huge shout out to Chapman, because they have been incredibly generous with students. Redlands, Baylor, Denver, these are all private schools. Except for University of Oregon at the bottom. We also had a lot of kids get money from Indiana, TCU. So there's some good news out there. And I think when families are thinking about prices, one of the things that private schools are trying to do is that they're trying to match the price of in-state or of the institutions. So when you're thinking about, oh, I could never afford it, right? Being open to some of the private schools can get you a good discount. One thing to note about merit aid, because families always come in, they're like, how do I maximize the merit aid? You maximize the merit aid by being overqualified for the school. If you have a higher GPA than the average GPA, if you have higher test scores than the average, if you are incredibly engaged or more engaged than the average of what's happening at that school, that's how you get merit aid. They're using it to get you to think about them and to get you to come. And I have to say, some students have taken advantage of it, and it's been really amazing experiences for them. It also feels pretty good. The kids feel good when the money comes in. All right. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on testing because AJ did a great job. I just basically is like, it's just confusing. I think test optional and test blind are going to stay around for a while. And as far as how we counsel our clients, I think testing is an opportunity to show a strength. And if you are getting your scores and they are higher than the average scores at the school, like you should send them. But more and more, I think what we're seeing is that testing is, if you have a 1600, it doesn't mean you're going to get in. We've had kids with perfect test scores. It does not mean that you're going to get into any college that you want to go to, right? And also, if you don't have a great test score and you decide not to submit it, that is not going to be the deciding factor either. Testing is a really good way to show colleges what you're capable of and to really show them on a national scale right? That your grades and your test scores line up, right? Or even I was talking to a student today who did really poorly in their math class first semester of junior year. It's a long story, I will not share. However, what I explained is that doing well on the SAT math will help a college recognize that that student's bad grade that one semester was not the norm. It gives them another data point, right? So for a lot of kids, it's nice for them to have another data point. I keep hitting the wrong thing on my mouse. Whew. All right, so I don't know how parents are feeling out there. I feel it every day. Students are fatigued. We have to remember that they're a year behind, but they're a year behind in many ways, right? So it's not just content, and they may not be a full year behind in content, right? But they did kind of miss out a year of social development. They missed out on a year of time management skills. And that's where we're seeing a lot of things start to fall apart. This was a really hard semester for juniors. I think it was especially hard for kids in the Sequoia Union High School District because they spent most of last year online. They had so many things they had to do this fall in terms of readjusting, and the teachers are readjusting, and, you know, like Patrick talked, they're still expected to get through the content for that AP exam or that IB exam, right? So they're going fast and it's furious, and the kids have just not been used to it. So I just wanted like a shout out, if there are kids that are on tonight, I just want to say, like, we see you, and we know this is really hard, and we're just really proud of you for like getting back into it. And if you're a parent, again, like, we see you, we feel you, and it's hard. I am hoping that we're going to see that second semester, they sort of kind of get their groove back. But I'll be honest, to all the kids that I've been meeting with that are juniors and looking at their transcripts, like, I haven't seen anyone yet who has a perfect first semester junior year. They're probably out there. They may just not be in my office, but I think I just want everybody to know, like, if you're feeling it and this feels hard and overwhelming and you're just tired, you are absolutely not alone. All right, so the last part of the learnings is just recognizing later on in the process, right? So 9 months from now, when you start working on your essays, we want you to know on the front end right now that there are a lot of questions that are focused on social justice, community, inclusion, and service. And that in a perfect world, you're doing something related to those things, right? So that you have something to write about. And to give you an example, basically, I just put some up here. Princeton, their question. At Princeton, we value diverse perspectives and the ability to have respectful dialogue about difficult issues. Share a time when you had a conversation with a person or a group or people about a difficult topic. What insight did you gain, and how would you incorporate that knowledge into your thinking in the future? So this is not your personal statement. They're already getting that. These are the supplemental essays, and this is what Princeton wants. And by the way, this is one of 4 questions that Princeton wants you to fill out in addition to the common application. Then you've got a place like Oregon. Describe an experience with discrimination, whether it was fighting against discrimination or recognizing your contribution to discriminating against a person or group. What did you learn from the experience? In what ways will you bring those lessons to the University of Oregon? I hope all the parents out there right now are looking at these and going like, these are hard, and they are. University of San Diego, right? How have you made an impact in your high school and your community, right? University of Michigan, everybody comes from different communities. Tell us about one of yours and your role in it. These are hard questions. And let me tell you, they're really, really hard if you haven't had any experiences that line up with them. So one of the things that we tell students is, not only is it important that you should do it so that you can answer these questions, more importantly, there are a lot of problems in the world. And what I think colleges want to see is, what do you care about? And what are you willing to start to make a difference, right? It doesn't mean you have to change the world, not tomorrow, not even next year, right? But what do you care about and how can you help? And the fact is that getting out into the community in a safe way, we find that really builds self-esteem for students and helps students recognize you all have so many gifts to give our community. And sometimes you just need a little nudge, right, to get out there. And that I promise, if you are doing something that you believe in and that's important to you, it's going to be a good experience. Okay, so here we go. So the way I kind of thought about this is you're going to get a Gantt chart. And if you don't know what a Gantt chart is, it's basically all of these sections on the slide. And then underneath it are all the different things that we do with students. And then across the top is months of the year. So what we've done is kind of pick apart these parts of the process and tell you when you should be working on them, right? And what I really want to focus in right now is what's your next right thing? What's your next right move? I am not going to tell you everything you need to do regarding academics. I'm going to tell you what you need to be thinking about now. And if you want the other stuff, there's plenty of ways you can connect with us to kind of get that. All right, academics. Here's the deal. Juniors, you are currently in the 6th semester of a 6th semester game, right? The first GPA that colleges are going to see is comprised of your first 6 semesters: freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, right? So you are in 6 of 6 right now. So make it count. A lot of what students are doing right now is deciding what they're going to take senior year in terms of their classes. When you're doing that, we want to really stress that you want to maintain your rigor for senior year. And if you're doing really well junior year, you might want to up your rigor. And what I mean by that is harder courses. Rigor is how hard your courses are. So APs, honors, that kind of thing. Okay. I'm going to tell you a little secret, and I think most people would not like that I would say it this way. On your college application, when you send it in the fall of your senior year, you do not have senior year grades yet. They may ask for them. And if you apply regular decision, they definitely will get them. But when you apply, it is your 6 semesters through junior year, plus the list of courses you are taking senior year. Keep that in mind. You are being judged on the classes that you're choosing to take. All right. You need to prepare for your AP exams. Again, you guys went through different pieces of this, and Patrick kind of explained, like the SAT or the ACT, AP exams are another data point to really show what a kid knows, right? Now, is it going to be hard this year to get a 5? It might be, I don't know, right? But don't discount it. Again, for a kid who maybe got a B in AP calculus, right? But comes through with a 5 on the AP exam, that's giving the colleges 2 data points. And they can decide, right, which the more important one is for them. The last piece, right now, make connections with your teachers. You will have to do probably at least one letter of recommendation, most likely 2. Typically, they are your junior year classes, the ones you're going to right now, and those lovely teachers that are teaching you. You can choose senior year teachers, but if you're applying on an early time frame, they have to have those in before November, so you don't get a lot of time. So what does that mean? If you're a student and you're listening right now, yeah, it means you go into office hours. Not everybody's office hours. Pick a couple. Think about which teacher might know you better or understand what you're interested in, right? Go through and try to, pinpoint who might be good people. You don't have to ask them yet. You still have plenty of time to ask them. Right now, you just need to be thinking about it because most kids aren't. The last piece is that I wanted to show you, these are transcripts. These are the transcript boxes from 2 Woodside students. And the one on the top, totally solid student, really, like really good rigor, 2 to 3 AP courses, junior and senior year, a B+ here or there, right? Ending up with a cumulative weighted GPA of a 4.129 and an unweighted GPA of a 3.9. And then what you see at the bottom is the weighted 10 through 12, which technically is what the UCs are looking at. They'll get all your grades, but they're calculating the A through G, 10 through 12, right? So that's your UC GPA. So we always get the question, are colleges looking at weighted or unweighted? And the answer is they can do whatever they want. And a lot of them will recalculate your GPA, right? So honestly, like a lot of times what your GPA is somewhere between your unweighted and your weighted, okay? I will tell you right now, I do not know, the Cal Grant GPA, I think is only used for need-based aid for California. So I would just ignore that one. Most of the GPA that the colleges are going to use are going to be somewhere between your weighted and your unweighted GPA, okay? But again, it's not something you have to worry about. Whatever they do to your transcript, they're doing to everybody else's. Everybody gets on the same scale, basically is the point. However, what I want to really show you is the difference between this student, who I would say is totally solid, did an amazing job at high school, and the student below it, whose transcript is flawless, right? This student took a ton, 4, 5 AP courses, straight A's, right, in terms of unweighted, and their weighted GPA is a 4.393. And the reason I do this is because families are like, well, my student has a 4.0, like, but not all 4.0s are the same. And when you went back and looked at that UCLA slide, right, one of these students is in the range and one of them is not, even though they are both fully capable, solid, good students, okay? So the nuances of the transcript are something that is actually kind of important. And that's what colleges are doing when they're looking at the transcript, is they're looking at how hard are the courses. They are looking, even though on your GPA, if you have an A-, you're still getting A credit. And if you have a B+, you're getting B credit, right? But they're seeing A-, A's, A+, right? The transcripts look a lot differently than you think they do, right? Because of the nuance in how they're looking at them. So I just wanted to point that out because I just think it's important. All right, we've made it through one. We've gotten through academics. Way to go, people. Here we go. Activities. Get involved. Again, this is just reiteration. What problems do you see? What do you care about? How can you get involved? How can you use your talents? We are going to give you links to these 3 pieces that we have on our blog, which give you immense ideas, so many ideas about different things you can do based off of your interests. You don't do them all. You don't do everything. What colleges are looking for, and this is what you'll get from that, initiative, intellectual curiosity, and introspection, that's what colleges want. What does initiative means? It means you have an idea and you take a few steps in that direction. That's taking initiative. Intellectual curiosity is figuring out what you like to learn and learning more. It might be inside class. It might be on YouTube. It might be a TED Talk. It could be a lot of different things, but is this student actually intellectually curious about the world? And then the last part is introspection. And introspection is, are you thinking about why you do what you do and what you care about? Honestly, if you can start figuring that out, your college application writing is going to be so much easier. And also, if you're involved in journalism and you hate it, then drop it and find something else. You do not have time in high school to be doing things that do not feed you or do not help you in some way or do not bring you joy. Now, does it mean you drop journalism and you watch TikTok for an extra hour a day? No, it means drop journalism and find something else, right? If the volleyball team isn't doing it for you and you're spending 12 hours a week doing it, there are other things out there. Testing. Here's what we tell kids, and we usually tell them last summer, but choose a test and register for 2 different dates. A, one might get canceled. B, there's a lot of super scoring going on with the ACT and the SAT. And here's the other thing, and AJ maybe can talk, one of you guys can talk about this later on. I'm seeing less consistency between the tests. And so a kid might prepare equally for the March test and then take it in June. And one of the tests is like, they're 150 points higher. And so what that means is if you don't score well, that might not have been your test, but the next test might be, right? Do you need to take it 5 times? No, I'm not suggesting that at all, but at least give yourself the benefit of the doubt and try to take it twice. Then of course you're checking your scores against the schools on your list and what the averages are and things like that. And then deciding if you want to take the test again. That's what kids are doing at this point. College list. Woo, this one's overwhelming. We just are starting to do our workshops on college list. This slide has all of my favorite places to do initial college research. Again, we'll give you links to all of these different things. Our concept is start with an easy list, grab a few schools and find a way to learn about them that is kind of comprehensive. So we love the FISC guide. You know, you can get it from the library. It doesn't have to be the most recent version, but find a couple schools that you've just thought about. Like you don't have to know anything about them and start reading the FISC guide, because before you start reading about colleges, it's kind of hard to know what your values are. You got to read a few and be like, oh, I realize now that I am, you know, I'm really interested in Greek life, or sports is more important to me because I really like the way at University of Michigan, like, you know, what happens with the football team, right? Or Clemson. They have to have a little bit, or it's even going on some local college visits. Like they have to have some sort of a reference to start to decide what's important to them. So we have an initial phase of research, which is just kind of basic. And then we make the kids dig in really deep. And a lot of these places will have. What you're trying to do is to determine your values. Now I'm losing my voice, right? What besides academics, location, size, and acceptance rate, what do you care about? And then figure out how you can find that information. And you're doing that deeper college research, and then you have to start balancing the list, right? So balancing means that you have schools that are stretch schools, where maybe you aren't quite at the, you know, at the middle of the grades or the SATs. You know, you've got your target schools where you're kind of in the mix, and then you have your safety or foundation schools. A great thing, if you haven't done it, is to look on Naviance. Naviance has a lot of great information in there. And it also has scattergrams. So it has what students have happened in the context of Woodside High School, which I think is really important. Instead of always looking at national numbers, I think it's really important to look at local numbers in terms of what's happening at Woodside. So those are all ways that you can start to determine. And let me tell you this, gosh, kids love the reach schools, right? Don't we all, right? They're all the ones that we've heard of, and they're all the ones you're like, you know, my life's gonna be perfect if I just go to that school. First off, that's not true. So that's one part. But the other part is what we're seeing is that because kids are applying to more schools, right? Because of the unpredictability, right? That when you're applying, you need to be really solid on your target schools and totally happy with your foundation or safety schools. Okay, because getting into your reach school is getting a little bit harder every year. And the other part of that is reach schools, or let's just say any school that has a 15% or less acceptance rate, is going to be unpredictable. Okay, so what's important when you're starting to do college research is to grab a lot of different types of schools with a lot of different acceptance rates. And then, you know, if you're in the University of Oregon, apply in the beginning of October, and things could go really well from there on out. Demonstrating interest. Okay, this is a part, this is, you know, the buzzword of like kids demonstrate interest in the college's care. They do. And there's actually lists out there where you can see how much they care in terms of demonstrating interest. It is the way that colleges are trying to keep track of your touch points with them. And what they're trying to determine is, can they yield you, right? So yield is the number of students who are accepted that come, and it drives a lot of college admissions, especially at schools in the middle, okay? Schools at the top, your, Princeton's, your Carnegie Mellon's, your Stanford, like everybody demonstrates interest. It doesn't make a difference, but schools in the middle, it really does. And some of the things that you can do to, demonstrate interest is sign up for some of their virtual programming. I've got some good news and bad news about this part in terms of the college research. The good news, there is a ton of stuff out there, right? UCSB has an entire YouTube channel dedicated to, like, you can see their classes, you can see all kinds of things that are going on campus, right? And the content is amazing, right? So that's the good news. Colleges have really created dynamic and interesting on-demand pieces for you to learn about their college. Here's the bad news. They have created these things. Therefore, one must try it, right? There's really no excuse for not understanding or better understanding a college because the information's right there on their website. Okay, so the good news, tons of information. The bad news, it means that you have to spend a little bit more time accessing it. You can also attend a college visit at your school. If you see that they're coming, it's a great time to connect with the admissions officer. Obviously, most of them are via Zoom at this point, but they'll kick up some in the spring. And if it's a school you're interested in, you also sometimes get out of class. Could be a perk. And then you can actually go to campuses, right? Some of them, like, there's sort of variability in terms of how open colleges are in the era of COVID, but most of them are probably going to be open this spring. And it's a good time to go see colleges. Okay, the writing. Okay, there's nothing you actually have to do about the writing right now. Okay. But the first step to the writing would be to get to know your UC Insight questions. So the UC application has 8 questions and you choose 4. And they're 350 words each. They are not essays, right? They are short answers. And what I think is really important about these questions is that it makes you think of 4 different things about yourself. So would I go in and look at those insight questions right now? Yes, because it'll be a good gauge for you to be able to say, okay, I can answer a leadership question. I am good on community involvement. I think I can do academic interest. Maybe I'm going to talk about my best quality, right? It gets you to kind of think about different things that you can talk about. And our rule of thumb, I would assume not everyone agrees with us, but we don't let kids talk about the same thing twice, because the person who's reading your application doesn't want to hear about the same thing twice. So when you're thinking about things that you're involved in at school or what you want to do this, what you might want to do this summer, I would go in and look at these questions and see where you, get a gauge of where you are now. You still have a lot of time, so use it. So when you go in there, you can brainstorm ideas. If you don't feel like you have a lot of content in terms of what you can put into those insight questions, well, there's always summer, right? And the other thing is when you get to the writing process, you're honing in on characteristics about yourself, right? Things you're proud of, things that, make you unique. And the entire college writing process hinges on being able to come up with good examples. So you just keep a little catalog in your brain. The kids are young enough, they can keep things in their brain. I myself am not, so I have to put them down on a note on my phone. But if a note on your phone works for you, that's great too. But if if you're talking at the dinner table and someone talked, this might be for parents, but your kid talks about something that happened that day and you're like, wow, my kid helped out this kid who was really struggling. That is totally who my kid is. Jot it down on a note, because on demand, it's a little hard to come up with the examples. right? So those are some of the things that happen later as we're developing, into the writing phase. And I just say, like, the more cognizant and the more you can pay attention to what's happening this semester and over the summer and sort of jotting down some ideas here or there, it's going to make everything else a lot easier. And side note, high school kids, you are infinitely more interesting than you think you are. So just keep that in mind. Financial aid. Okay, if this is going to be a part of the process and a part of the decision making in terms of where a student's going to go to school, I think it's an incredibly important part. Do a net price calculator at a couple of schools. Could be a public school, could be a private school. Really easy. Google school name and net price calculator. And that net price calculator is not perfect, but it's going to give you a sense at that institution how much it's going to cost. Not all net price calculators are created equal, but it's good just to kind of get in there. And they're using prior year tax information. So you could put in, you wouldn't put in 2021 tax stuff, you'd put in 2020, which hopefully would be easier to access. You also want with colleges to look at the listed price versus like what's the average price that people are paying, right? And is there merit aid opportunity and things like that. I think it's important to discuss this as a family and set some parameters in terms of, it is better to set the parameters on the front end than it is later when kids have investigated all these colleges and they come back with something that may not fit within those parameters. So although it's a long time or seems a long time before you're going to have to pay for college, these are some important things to bring up. The other thing is that there is this amazing thing that we have, which is called WUI, which is the Western University Exchange. We'll send a link to you. What WUI is it's a group of Western states that have agreed to take, if they take a California kid, right, if you get the WUI scholarship, you pay no more than 150% of in-state tuition. So it can be significantly less expensive than what you would be charged as an out-of-state student. And you would be really surprised how cheap it is to go to some schools, some state schools and universities in state that are not California. So that's a really good place to look for families who I would say are looking for a deal. And there are just some awesome colleges on there. I will tell you there's some colleges that are not, right? So like University of Oregon is not a WUI school. Boulder in Colorado is not a WUI school, but there are a tremendous number of amazing schools on that list. And we've been going through college research with our clients this last month, and I have just a new appreciation for like some of the state schools in Washington. Amazing campuses, and their size is like 8,000 to 10,000, which is often what a lot of kids are looking for. And then if you can add a WUI on top of that, that can be a pretty amazing option. Woo, all right. This is not all kids. It's not, it can be more, it can be less, but we just really wanted to break out to let families know, like, how much time are we talking about, right? In terms of the college process. And this is just an idea. This does not include college research. This is really like once you get to the summer and you start the college process. So it might take you 10 hours of research to get to a balanced college list. It's probably gonna take you about 6 hours to do the activities well and do it the right way. It's probably gonna take you 6 hours to gather all the information and input them into all the different applications that you need to do. The personal statement is going to take a ridiculous amount of time, right? And usually we have kids do about 4 drafts. And then those college supplements, depending on what your list is, which is that extra writing, can be a lot of extra time as well. When you look at this, I think what's important to note is, 30 hours on a personal statement? Like, honestly, the kids have never worked 30 hours on any academic thing that they have done up until this point. So yes, we recognize that seems like, what? But at the same time, like that means that your personal statement should be your full-time job for 1 week right? It can be done. The hard part is that kids aren't putting aside the time. So if you get nothing from this presentation except this little nugget, which is plan out your college time. Pick a day, pick an hour, act like it's a class, and just do something related to college. It will make everything so much easier, and it will not feel overwhelming because you're doing a little bit all the time. Last piece, don't panic. I know it seems like a lot, and in some ways it is a lot, but it does not have to be a terrible stress-induced frenzy. In terms of what we have at College Calm, you can, like, we put stuff up on our blog. I would like to do more, and hopefully we'll do more in the spring. We have Instagram and Facebook. We're going to send you a ton of handouts that you can refer to over time. You're going to have the question and answers. We do have a workshop series where we've taken kind of the 5 big parts of the process and broken them down into workshops that are 3.5 hours with the goal of Jenny and I doing the teaching, right? So Jenny and I teach the students, and then we put them in breakout rooms to do the work. I've been doing this a long time, and kids' capacity and ways that they do things are changing. And what College Calm is trying to do is meet them where they are. And part of that is they're better coming in for 3 hours and just getting it done than they are to meet with us on a regular basis and do their homework at 12 a.m. the night before. I always tell students, like, we can see it on the Google Docs, so we know when you did the work. So if it was 2 a.m., I'm not sure I'm going to read it. I don't think best work is done at 2 a.m. So if you are interested, and we also have counselors that work with students on an hourly basis. If you are interested, you can do a contact on our website. You can also email us at collegecalm@gmail.com, and we will get back to you as quickly as we can. And this is all the contact information for everybody that's been here. So thank you for listening. I know I go on and on, so now we need to go to some questions.
So I just wanted to thank you all. As Roxanne said, I have a senior this year, and I had a little bit of PTSD hearing both of your talks, but I learned stuff, and I think that you both, you brought so much to the table, and it's really impressive. So for anyone who's going through it, this is really a great guidebook. For the juniors right now, the name of the game is prepping for tests, and I would tell you that having someone help your kid prep for a test who isn't you is really lovely, and I think may help families still want to eat dinner together. Anyway, so I haven't seen many questions in there in the chat, so you guys should put those in for the AJ Tutoring and College Calm. There was a question about Naviance, and so we put the link in there and how your Woodside High students can link to it. And I didn't give a shout out, but Zarina and Lisa, and I don't know if Jimmy's on it, but the college counseling services at Woodside High, we have 3 counselors. They do a great senior newsletter, and they have lots of information as well. And they are also resources for you. So for the questions, I don't know, have you guys been seeing, Roxana or Peter, are you seeing questions?
I'm going to go to Jenny on this.
Okay, I'm going to unmute myself. Can you guys hear me? Thumbs up. Okay. Awesome. So I'll start with AJ. Have you guys noticed or know why there seem to be so few test dates in the Bay Area? And why it feels so impacted? I know, like, students are having to travel a lot farther. Is that just due to COVID? And then one question was directed directly towards Woodside. Are they going to open up a test date in the spring or fall? So just can you speak to that?
Yeah, happy to talk for sure about the first part. We don't exactly know how College Board and ACT are deciding things. It's certainly interesting that it's different in the Bay Area versus the rest of the state. What we have found is certainly it's been impacted in terms of testing in the Bay Area, but we have noticed that students have been able to find test sites when they're checking on a regular basis. New test sites are sometimes posted. So if families are continuing to check and getting signed up for a test date, then that's a good fit. Do we have students, and do I see some families in the chat here who are traveling a bit to take the SAT? Yes, that definitely happens. It happened a lot over the past couple of years. Sounds like it's still going to be a thing this spring for some families. If that's the case, and I see in the chat people planning to stay overnight, that is certainly a suggestion, right? Like do not drive out to the Central Valley the morning of your child's SAT. If at all an option for your family, you should certainly think about staying overnight. But the main thing I would say here is I'm sure College Board and ACT are noticing that it's really busy in the Bay Area, and hopefully they'll open some more testing sites. So keep an eye on it.
And as far as the Woodside High, I was on a PTSA meeting with the principal and some other people, and we asked about doing that because they did that this past year, and they don't have anything scheduled for the spring, and they said maybe in the fall. So for all of the Woodside High parents, if you're having a really hard time and it's an issue where you have to go far away or you can't get a testing date, send us a note. So that we can bring that to the administration and let them know if it's a really big issue.
One thing to add on the school testing dates, they were really heroic last year in coming through at the last minute and getting those testing dates put together. I think MA had one, Woodside had one. They were happening all around. I think the only unfortunate part that we saw with our students is that a lot of them didn't know about them until the last minute, so they weren't really prepared by the time they came. So, if you're looking to take a test, if you're hoping for one of those tests, I anticipate there will be options available. If there are not College Board options, that was when the schools stepped up and really came through. So the thing is, if you are looking for those options, make sure you're prepared for those options to actually come into fruition.
Okay, for College Com, when will you be providing copies of these slides to us, and when should we parents expect follow-up material, flyers, resources, etc.?
Great, happy to do the slides. We'll share the slides with everything else, and we're hoping to get it all to you by Friday morning.
And then AJ, AJ, will you be sharing your slides as well?
Yeah, we'll certainly be sharing a copy of our slides, and in past years we've sent some personal emails out, which is a little bit more information and a link to a few pieces of our website. We'll do that this year too.
Thank you. Okay, this one I'll give to AJ. This is a great question. When a student requests a 504 accommodations on the SAT or ACT, is that information shared with the university when scores are reported?
So from the test prep side of things, I would certainly say we work with a lot of students who have accommodations on testing. We're really happy to work with those students, whatever their accommodations are. Roxana, I'm not exactly sure how that appears on actual college applications though. Any insights there?
I don't think so. So here's an interesting development just in terms of the application process, is that it used to be that you had to send your scores from the College Board to the college in order for it to be official. And a lot of colleges have relaxed that. So a lot of them will take self-reported scores on the applications, in which case there is no information there. There's nothing they're adding that would say that they had extra time. And what they also allow you to take pictures of your score report and upload them to portals and things like that. So less and less it has to be done sent directly from College Board, which is like so lovely because it can take a couple of weeks. And, if a kid takes an October test and they need to turn it in November, there's a lot of things that have gotten more relaxed. So I think there's a lot of ways to do it that the information would not be on there. It's been a long time since I've seen the score report. I am pretty sure they are not allowed to disclose that. But that's my hunch. That's not necessarily a reality.
I would say
kids.
My daughter, when they asked for a copy of her report, after she was accepted to confirm that that was the score. So
Exactly.
she had to send an official report, but instead of having to send it to all the places, it was just the one that she got into.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways, it's because of the test optional piece and just access. It's expensive to send those scores. It's always bothered me that it might take $180 to send your SAT scores to your schools. But yes, you're right, Lauren, most schools are asking for confirmation after students are admitted.
Okay. This is a great question. For AJ, my student is a junior. Should I be seeking out an SAT testing appointment on my own, or will Woodside High School prompt provide this information at some point?
Yep. So students would register for the SAT directly through College Board. And they would register through the for the ACT directly through ACT, which is just the name of that organization as well. Lauren, I guess to you, whether things are going out for the junior class is a question for the Woodside community specifically.
So I sent out a link to the College Board in one of my emails that I sent out to everyone. I didn't send it out to the ACT. I can do that. But I think the Woodside College Prep really gets going, I think probably in the spring of junior year, or in senior year, it's very hands-on. So there hasn't been anything else official.
Yeah, I would also add to that if you want to, so the test dates are only open to a certain point right now. And I want to say it's through June. Although they might have opened up for fall. But if you sign up on College Board, it'll be like, notify me, whatever. If you do that, then you'll get pinged when the next round of things open up. And it's like concert tickets, right? Or getting a COVID test at this point, where you got to be at the right place at the right time. But at least if you know it's coming and it's opening, you can be prepared. And I think that's how people get local sittings. And back to the local sittings part, the high schools have to agree that they want to have the test, and they have to have it open up to kids from all over. And I just think there's not a lot of schools on the peninsula that want to open up their schools to kids all over. And that's one of there's just not a ton. Like, even if you are the first person to get in there, your options might only be Carlmont and Burlingame. Right? It's an issue of like schools not offering it. So that's why you get there always seems to be more tests open in Marin. I just think per capita, there's more schools open.
Okay, this is for you, Roxana. For GPAs and UC GPA, the question and also UC approved courses, there was some concern in the chat that we know that the UCs don't use the GPA for freshman year grades, but they still see the freshman year grades, and they don't use the senior year grades. But at the end, if you choose to go to a UC, they do see your senior year grades, correct?
Correct. Once they've already admitted you.
Right. So that was just a clarification point. So, and then also, if you need to see which classes are UC approved at your high school, you can go to UC Doorways and look at that. I'll put that in there. And then, do you know of any UCs requiring letters of rec? I was just thinking about specialty programs.
There are some specialty programs. Berkeley was doing like a pilot program, but it wasn't everybody turn in a letter of recommendation. It was simply something that would come out this time of year. And it was they were randomly generated. So there's a couple of things that the UCs do that require students to submit more information. For example, there's sort of this verification process, and it gets sent out by different schools and randomly to students where they have to verify their activities. And a lot of times they have to add a letter of recommendation to go along with that. I think families are often like, oh, that means they're like on the cusp and it's possible they're going to get into, Berkeley. They're actually randomly generated, but you can't ignore them. because if you ignore them, they can basically withdraw your application. So it's not a part of the normal process. There are, in some cases, specialty programs that require a supplemental application, and sometimes it's a part of that. You're looking at, specialty applications would be, it could be nursing asks for a separate supplement, and arts asks for another, asks for some pretty specific materials and things to send. It's not your average College of Art. Nothing in the College of Arts and Sciences is asking you for that stuff. But if you hear that someone has turned in a letter of recommendation, a lot of times it's because of one of those randomly generated things. And like Jenny said, there's a website that's called UC Doorways. And what you do is type in Woodside High School as the high school, and it basically shows you all of the classes at Woodside, and it shows you which ones get an extra point for the UCs. And it also shows you which categories they're in, and things like that. And it is true that you have to put your freshman grades on the application. What they do with them, I am unclear on, but they are there.
And then the last piece, just to confirm, if you do take senior year and you tank all of your grades, you get D's or C's or F's in certain areas, the UCs do have the right to rescind your admittance to that school, because you have to have at least a minimum GPA of a 3.0 in both semesters, I believe. So it can't just be overall, you have to have at least 3.0 in both semesters. And if you self-report something that's inaccurate and then your transcript comes in, that can also be a problem. So although they don't ask for your transcript because you're self-reporting, they do clarify it eventually.
Yeah, and if there's discrepancies, they have the right to take away your admitted status. And I think it's not just the UCs in terms of second semester, senior year, or, a lot of times kids are like, whoa, process is over, right? If you are an A student and you get a couple B's second semester of senior year, like nobody's going to care. If you're an A student and you get C's and D's, they're going to care. And also those D's are not giving you credit. So like if you get a D in English, you aren't graduating. So it's all within a range, right? I think definitely above a 3.0 and definitely relaxed a little bit is fine. Totally losing and not paying attention is not going to work.
Okay, and this is for maybe for AJ. How can a student prepare to test on chemistry, for example, if they haven't taken it? The student took physics, bio, or human bio. So I'm guessing that's for like an AP exam. Do you have students who prepare for the AP exams who haven't taken the course?
We have very few. You would need like it's an exceptional endeavor, I think. So you would really need a pretty strong reason to do so. I think specifically AP chemistry is taught, it's at like the general chemistry level and encompasses, I think, either two semesters or 2 quarters of college general chemistry, which is at like a level above.
I think they're talking about for sorry to interrupt you, the ACT and SAT test, not that they wanted to do
those are gone,
but the science part of that.
Yeah, so the subject tests for the SAT are gone.
Yeah, and I think so. To speak to the ACT, there isn't really any. There will be like maybe 1 question per test out of many questions. That will actually we'll ask you to reflect upon your content knowledge. Everything else is data analysis, just like reading charts and graphs and drawing conclusions from those things. So if your student didn't take chemistry, that should not impact their ACT scores.
Okay. College Comm, can you talk about the difference between early decision and early action, reach, target, and likely? And just to put more into that, actually, we'll just start there. How do you define like the early decision versus early action?
Yes, no problem. So early decision students can only apply to one school early decision. And if the student applies and they are accepted, they sign, they basically sign an extra contract when they apply that says, if you accept me, I will go. And it should be extraordinary circumstances that they would not follow through with that. Okay, so early decision is binding. Early action, on the other hand, is simply turning in your application early, and then you get your information on whether you're accepted or not earlier, right? Before, and then you have until, until May to make the decision with everybody else. You just hear earlier. You can, most of the time, apply to a lot of different, you can apply to a ton early action schools because they're not exclusive. You can also, depending on what the language is for early decision, it's possible sometimes that the language, and it's different on every school. I wish I had like a blanket answer for this, but you have to really look at the early decision, the wording, because some early decision schools do not want you to apply early action anywhere else. And some early action schools do not want you to apply if you're applying early decision somewhere. So you have to kind of be really careful of that language. There's also, of course, a third category, which I didn't want to confuse things, but there's something called restrictive early action. And restrictive early action is actually like the program at Stanford, which means you can apply early action. It is not binding, right? You still have until May 1st to make your decision. However, you are not allowed to apply early action or early decision anywhere else. And I think families are always like, well, would they know? Yeah, they figure it out. So those are kind of the different programs in terms of applying. And some schools have early action, early decision, and regular. Some schools are just early action and regular. Some schools are just early decision or regular. There's also this lovely thing that we're going to see lots and lots and lots and lots of more of, which is called early decision 2. So early decision 1 is usually November 1st, and you hear before Christmas. Early decision 2 is a January deadline, and you hear sort of in February, but again, it's that binding piece. So when you think early decision is so that the school knows you're coming and they don't have to spend 1 ounce of energy recruiting you, right? So it is, the decision is done. So they know if they admit you, you're coming, and that can be something that enrollment management really likes. And that's why there's a lot of early decision 2s popping up, because if you don't get in your early decision 1, why not do early decision 2 and be binding? I will say this, like, I do think in essence, it does help to do early decision. I think it gives you a little bit of a boost, but do I think it's that this process is like in the best interest of students? It's not, it's in the best interest of the colleges. Then, okay, so there's like reach, target, and likely. Well, so this is something that changes actually depending on where you sit. If you come in with a 3-6, your ranges are going to be different in terms of how that looks. But we actually had a 4th category. So there's something called lottery schools. If it has a 13% or lower acceptance rate, I don't care what GPA you have, it's a lottery school, because there are so many people applying that have the same academic credentials. It's a crapshoot. Okay, so we have and it doesn't matter what your GPA is in terms of those being lottery schools. The next is reach. So reach schools are typically schools where when you look at the average GPA and you look at your own, and you look at the average test scores and you look at your own, and possibly you go into Naviance and you see where all the green circles are and where you sit. A reach is where the kids that are getting in are slightly higher than where you are. A target means you are absolutely in the middle 50th percentile of all the statistics, right? And then a safety or foundation school, whichever word you prefer, is a school where you are overqualified. So you have a better GPA and better test scores significantly than the average. So for like a highly, a kid that has amazing grades and test scores, their reach schools, right? They'll have lottery schools, and then their reach schools might be schools that have like a 20% or less acceptance rate, and their targets might be somewhere between 20% and 40%, and then their safeties might be greater than 40%. I think acceptance rate is a really important number when you're looking at colleges and trying to balance a list. That's the best way to try to figure it out, because that just tells you how incredibly selective they are. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Okay, let's see.
When
do you need
time too? So we're sort of at, so if we have one or two
Yes,
more questions.
this is like our last question. I think in terms, I guess the last one I can use is, when do you need to let your schools know that you're coming there? So that your colleges, when do you have to let them know that you're accepting their
So typically
offer?
everyone lets you know by April 1st, and you have to let them know by May 1st. However, if you do early action, you could hear in December, right? But you don't have to make that decision until May 1st.
And then
sort of the timeline.
Really last one. What is the average number of schools kids are applying to?
Oh, Jenny and I could talk an entire webinar on this one. So here's the deal. Kids can get away with 6 or 7 schools if they're the right schools and the schools are balanced, and it's balanced and they have varying acceptance rates. I would say what we're seeing is closer to 12 to 13, and that's including the UC campuses as one, right? Just because it's one application. So we're seeing those numbers. They used to be closer to 10. I'd say now they're closer to 12, 13. Any kid that goes over 13 is going to be incredibly fatigued and they're just going to run out of steam. And that's a lot of what we saw this year. So what we do is, if a kid comes with a list that's bigger than that, we just really prioritize. And, some of them at the end decided to take schools off their list because either they weren't really interested, or, it wasn't as good of a fit as they thought it was, or they were just applying to apply and they just lost their energy. So I would say somewhere between 10 and 12 is a good number. Again, the UCs we count as one, because it's one application, and also the UCs are incredibly unpredictable. And so we don't find, like, the UCs, we have a hard time balancing a list with just the UC system.
Okay, I think that's it.
Right.
Awesome.
Well, thank you all for coming, and to all of our presenters. You guys were amazing, really amazing. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. We wish you all the best of luck. And if you need support or you have some questions, you've got our email. Let us know.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah.
Excellent. You guys were amazing, really amazing. I mean, I think I have again PTSD because I just went through this and I have to go through it back to back.